love you, Gabimaru. Stop! What did I do this time?
I never said that I would do it. I can't just trust a kunoichi.
Who knows? I might betray you.
Honestly, I would prefer that we try not to waste more time.
I didn't expect that. Hold on. Why are you taking your clothes off?
It's all you, Gabimaru. Don't die, Gabimaru. Gabimaru, you're our man. If you can't do it, we're screwed.
Gabimaru is an ugly and worthless midget who gets sentenced to have his head cut off for trying to substitute for the Grim Reaper. That all changes when he and a large bunch of other death row inmates are forced to play a nasty form of tag. Soon there is a small bunch left that gets chosen to go on a deadly mission to retrieve the elixir of immortality from a mythical land known for turning humans into exotic flower pots. But before this, a samurai with the best hairstyle known to man starts trying to cut off the living gnome's head. All the prison lords get excited to watch this, but things get weird when Gabimaru's neck of steel snaps the sword in half. Afterward, a smoke show hottie named Sajiri begins writing his life story and about gives him a heart attack with her refreshingly morbid sense of humor. She realizes that he is a ninja from the Iwagakure village and asks if his low-budget Naruto training is why his body is resistant to steel. But he says it's probably because the samurai's sword skills are even less refined than his hairline. The prison lord then makes the guards tie him up to be burnt at the stake, which is commonly used to get criminals like him warmed up for the flames of hell. Out of mercy for the fun-sized psycho, the guards try to unalive him before the flames would do so. But his dollar store Wolverine body breaks their spears as well, leaving them no choice but to light him up. For some reason, he also becomes fire-resistant and cracks a smile through the flames like he is chilling in an extra hot sauna. After getting put back in the cell, he asks if Sajiri would like to try his freshly roasted sausage. But she turns him down, not vibing that in any way. On the contrary, she does get a little curious to know about his tragic backstory, so he wastes no time in telling her how his parents got sent to the other side by his village chief, who then groomed him into a death machine. He goes on to say that he wants death because his ninja village betrayed him for trying to abandon their caveman lifestyle. Moments later, they bring him out to try out a new idea by forcing two bulls to snap him like a wishbone, but he pulls back and smashes their skulls into each other before still claiming that he actually wanted them to succeed. Sajiri then tells him to stop the cap and asks for the reason why he tried to leave the village. But the prison lord interrupts her. This idiotic mini-butcher then tells her that his village chief made him get married to his daughter. She was the ugliest baddie in the land and kept trying to turn him into a simp until he got tired of her attempts to become his mommy and humbly told the chief to take his wannabe Disney princess back. The chief agreed on the condition that Gabimaru would do one last job, but that turned out to be the mission they used to set him up for the arrest. Later on, Sajiri heads in for some shut-eye, but one of the prison lords warns her of Gabimaru's true hollow nature. He tells her about the lack of emotion Gabimaru had when he turned 20 men into a Jeffrey Dahmer-style main course. But she gets curious and asks why such a hollow man would fight for his life instead of accepting his fate. Gabimaru also takes some time to think in his cell and realizes that he was, in fact, trying to stay alive, so he decides to stop trying. However, after the next execution attempt, he walks out of the bath of burning oil like he spent his summer vacation in hell's best resort. Seeing that nearly causes the prison lord to shit himself. But then Sajiri tells him to make preparations for yet another special execution. Moments later, Gabimaru gets escorted through a tunnel and keeps asking about why they are trying so hard. But the prison lord swears they have finally found a way to send him up to the lord. He gets shocked when he sees Sajiri waiting at the center of the room and asks who she really is, so the prison lord tells him that she is actually an executioner from the Yamada clan. The moment she promises to grant his wish, he predicts the strength of her attack and realizes that she can actually take off his head. His survival instincts kick in, causing him to shatter his shackles, and she immediately charges in to land the killing blow. But he dodges at the last moment and barely makes it out with his head still attached. She then exposes his lie of hating his wife, that he actually does have some feelings for her in his dark heart, and that is the reason why he resists getting sent up to join his ancestors. He then steals a sword and attacks her, while still claiming to be an alpha who would never give his heart up to a botched princess. As Sajiri blocks his attacks, he flashes back to memories of the time he got back from a mission and tried to stop Yue. his wife from getting attached to him. She gave him a hug instead and told him about the horrible day her father decided to grill her face because she wanted to be a baddie, before he could say anything else to push her away. She gave him a kiss and exposed the beta simp hidden behind his tough guy facade. Sajiri then tells him to accept that he actually wants to live for her, but he keeps fighting and says it's pointless to keep thinking about her when he has been sentenced to life as an executioner's advanced training arc. Before he can land another strike, she pulls out a pardon from the shogun, promising him immunity from all his crimes and a chance to reunite with Yui. The only catch is that he has to visit a mythical land called Shinsenkyo that had only recently been discovered and is believed to hold the elixir of immortality. She further explains how the shogun once sent a search party to said place to find the elixir, but when their boats came back, all that was left were body parts of the adventurers that had become one with Mother Nature. The shogun then gathered his subjects and made a decree for the strongest and most feared criminals to be gathered for a new expedition in exchange for their freedom. Sajiri also mentions rumors she had heard of Yui's decision to wait for Gabimaru's return and asks if he is ready to risk it all for her. But the prison lord has other ideas and tells the guards to take them both out. After shedding a single tear of hope, Gabimaru activates a fiery ninjutsu and stacks up the guards like Legos while she cripples the prison lord with fear. Gabimaru then says he is ready to get on the next boat to Shinsenkyo, but Sajiri tells him they have to get to a town called Edo to meet the shogun first. On the way to present Gabimaru to the shogun, Sajiri reminisces on the past. Years ago, a worthless chatterbox was brought out for execution and received permission to run his mouth one last time. The gray-haired death machine that sent him to the great beyond with a single slice was Sajiri's father, Kichiji, and his greatness in the Yamada clan inspired her to follow in his footsteps. After her first execution, the nobles commended her skill, and she tried to play it cool, but the man's ghost suddenly grabbed her, and she almost lost bladder control. A senior executioner named Izan recommended sticking to cutting veggies instead, but she swore to become the first feminist butcher. Her second execution looked a little better. But this time, the criminal's soul entered the sword to torture her and gave her a glimpse of the true hell that waits for a hottie who thinks rolling heads is better than life as a Giga Chad's housewife. Her path to becoming even more skilled than her father has now led her to Gabimaru, who is currently being presented to this fat and rather soft-looking shogun, Nariyoshi, along with a group of other criminals. Minutes pass, and the criminals start to get frustrated by the masks they are forced to wear, while Sajiri reads through their crimes to make herself feel better about her foolish career choice. They all keep making a fuss about their human rights until one of the nobles begins explaining the risks involved with getting the elixir. Along the line of getting the crash course, a female assassin named Yusuriha asks Gabimaru if he wants to get play with her plot on the island, but he ignores her. Hearing her talk like he is some average dude gets Sajiri curious, so she slowly pulls out her blade to check if his soul is pure and sees a demon worse than Muzan from Demon Slayer raging inside him. When the criminals start acting up again, the nobles tell them to remove their masks so they can see a sergeant who became a living pot of flowers after the last expedition to Shinsenkyo. However, one good look at his face gives them more than enough reason to chicken out. This causes one of the nobles to cry about how lucky they are to have a shot at becoming mutated gardens until a little kid named Nuragai, who is also one of the criminals, asks if they will still get their freedom on the off chance that there is actually no elixir. After saying that being condemned human scumbags gives them no right to be picky, the nobles claim they can leave if they are no longer interested. Just then, a tweaked-out version of the Rock immediately gets up to leave and barely takes a step before Izan permanently logs him out of the group chat. One of the nobles then explains that they have all been assigned monitors from the Yamada clan and gives the executioner a signal to remind the criminals that trying to act tough will lead to their demise. After he tells the brain-dead criminals that they also can't return from the island without their monitors, Nariyoshi whispers something into his ear, after which, the noble reveals that there aren't enough boats for all of them because Nariyoshi spent a big chunk of the budget on junk food. Before they can understand what the noble is trying to say, an ugly, scar-faced criminal named Chaobei begins choking out the man close to him and explains that they have to thin the herd by clapping each other. He gets the party started by crushing another stupid criminal with a rock, and they all follow suit while Gabimaru remains seated like a Sigma Chad. Seeing this, Nariyoshi's blubber-filled brain gets hyped by the violence, so he asks one of the nobles to describe the strongest among the criminals. While he reads out what makes the snot-faced convicts so special, Gabimaru continues his meditation and acts like nothing is happening. Izan uses the opportunity to tell Sajiri that the real reason she became an executioner is because she has daddy issues and clearly doesn't realize that she is a Sakura-level weakling. She then tells him a story about her sad and tragic childhood, where she constantly got bullied for being the daughter of a neck chopper. She knew a normal life was no longer possible, and found a sword that showed her the demons of death connected to her soul, which was how she found her true purpose. While she keeps talking to Izan, the ugliest criminal in the group and his disgusting friend come up with an escape plan and think Sajiri will be the perfect target. As they charge in, she notices and tells Izan to stand back so she can deal with them the same way she handled her bullies back then. Once they get close enough, she swings her blade and sends the three of them to the afterlife. But the demons immediately start dragging her soul. Their voices vanish the moment she hears Gabimaru telling Nariyoshi that forcing the criminals to clap each other is wrong because not all of them committed crimes for fun. The lead noble tells him to shut his little midget mouth, but he keeps talking, so they give the other criminals a free pass if they can take him out.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
One of them, with an IQ of about 5, picks up a rock to crack his skull, but Gabimaru dodges and tries to talk him out of the violence. The stupid thug refuses, so Gabimaru walks toward him and keeps complaining about always being forced to show his true colors. When he gets close, the dust-brained idiot keeps staring until Gabimaru suddenly rips out his neck and tears through the rest of them like an animal possessed by the Grim Reaper. After destroying the tent and taking out a couple more, he shoves his hands right into the last criminal's chest and digs out his worthless insides while Nariyoshi watches in horror. Sajiri wonders how he can so easily destroy people, so she pulls out her sword again and sees that he is also in a constant battle against the souls he has taken. The wannabe executioner then thinks they might be soulmates of death and sheds a tear, but Izan tells her not to think she has even half of Gabimaru's strength. Just then, the lead noble stops the fighting and assigns the rest of them to their respective executioners before they set out to get the elixir from Shinsenkaio. Sometime during the trip to Shinsenkaio, Gabimaru takes a trip down memory lane and recalls that, years ago, the disgustingly ugly village chief named Osa made his subjects try to spill his insides by shoving all their weapons into his body. He took it all like a true alpha and stood there smiling like the creepy old version of Deadpool while a young Gabimaru watched. Moments later, they get to the shores of Shinsenkaio, and he then tells Sajiri that the elixir of immortality definitely exists before they begin their journey into the island. As they get deeper into it, Sajiri falls in love with all the flowers, but Gabimaru tells her to stop being such a slow-brained dimwit and explains that such an explosion of flowers is just not scientifically possible. He also reminds her of what happened to the other humans and cuts the rope binding his hands to move freely, but she immediately orders him to tie them back. He then asks why they only get enough food for 3 days and a stupid drawing, but she responds by putting her sword against his neck and threatens to end his sad, miserable life if he disobeys orders. He apologizes for not having enough brain cells, so she ties his hands back together, moments before he suddenly gets his empty skull cracked by an incredibly ugly giant named Keion. Gabimaru gets back up and pops his neck back in place, while Sajiri gives him a quick rundown on Keion's psychotic love for weapons. He gets tired of listening to her damaged vocal cords and asks why Keion doesn't have his hands tied, prompting her to ask his assigned executioner, Kishu, who thinks talking less makes him look like a nonchalant dreadhead. She tries to argue with him, but Keion interrupts them to share his plans to turn the midget ninja into a ground beef patty. Gabimaru then tells him that fighting will only give the other criminals a head start, but Keion explains that his plan is to first destroy all the others so he can take his time searching for the elixir. Kishu and Sajiri both agree to stay out of the way, so Keion charges in, but Sajiri stops Gabimaru at the last moment so he can tie his hands again.
Are you serious right now? Seriously?
Keion uses the opening to shatter his deadliest weapons on the fun-sized idiot's body, but Gabimaru barely notices and finally finishes with the rope. He then launches Keion into the air and kicks one of his spears deep into his midsection. He expects the blow to put Keion out forever, but the ugly giant gets back up looking like every gym bro's worst nightmare. Moments later, Gabimaru turns him into skewered roadkill and shows his ropes to Sajiri so she won't get scared. Kishu then grabs Keion's head and wishes them luck since he no longer has to stay on the island. but Sajiri tells him to be careful on the way back to shore. He also tells her to trust no one and describes the acts of betrayal he witnessed among the others before they even got to the island. A plot-heavy hottie, Akajinu, had even gone as far as using her melons to deceive a stupid executioner named Shin who clearly didn't know what red flags were. When Kishu finishes teaching Sajiri that the world isn't a unicorn tea party where everyone follows the rules, he offers to take Gabimaru out, but the living gnome gets to him in an instant and hits him with a death stare that makes him regret his choice of words. At the time, Izan has just made it to shore and tries to hook up his boat, but the budget-friendly Cyclops, Rokiroda, builds up an appetite and turns him into a mushy Dorito. Akajinu has also just been reunited with her ancestors by the hands of the blind master simp named Shin, while the others take out the weakest amongst themselves. Kishu then reveals that the shogunate has sent word to Gabimaru's village to assemble a set of ninjas for the next expedition and wishes Sajiri luck before heading out. Little Miss Daddy Issues realizes that she doesn't actually know the short death machine she has been traveling with and decides to be a lot stricter, but he suddenly attacks and promises to make it painless if she stops resisting. His dream of reuniting with Yui suddenly becomes more important than being a good little prisoner, so he continues attacking until Sajiri pulls away to ask why he is breaking the rules. He explains that the other ninjas from his village will most definitely smoke him on sight unless he gets to the elixir, and her obsession with being executioner of the month will only slow him down. Once he resumes the attack, the stupid wannabe starts to question herself because of the feelings she has for him. Meanwhile, he also realizes that a part of his subconscious doesn't want to end her, and it reminds him of the day Yui made him experience having emotions. The confusion causes the human Grim Reaper to pull his punches and stops him from being able to land the final blow on Sajiri. But that is until Osa's teachings shut off his emotions and lead to Sajiri's sword getting cut in half. In an instant, she finds herself on the ground staring into the darkness that is Gabimaru's true nature as he gets ready to take her head off. Her heavy plot cannons and lethal face card cause him to hesitate again. And even Osa's dark spirit is not enough to turn off his emotions anymore. Just then, his feelings for Yui trigger a level of compassion that brings him to tears as he believes he has become too weak to do what is necessary. Sajiri immediately offers to pack up the sword and tells him that being an emotional midget is not so bad, so he doesn't finish her off. She also promises to let his murder attempt slide if he can truly commit to understanding his emotions. While they enjoy finding love on the island of death, an ugly middle-aged criminal named Tamiya and his dwarf executioner, Fuchai, find a beautiful flower garden. The butterfly makes him feel special until he sees its disgusting face and realizes that it just injected him with flower poison. He immediately cuts off his hand and watches with Fuchai as it transforms before they get surrounded by other creatures and giants that look like they escaped from Frankenstein's lab. A while back, Tamiya was a broke, worthless swordsman, popularly known as Dragon Blade, and his search for employment led him to an obese midget lord who kept boasting about his dragon gate before hiring Tamiya. During one of his liver-destroying drinking sessions, the blubber-brained lord clowned him for thinking he could actually kill a dragon, so Tamiya decided to destroy the lord's dragon gate as payback for the disrespect. After getting to the shores of Shinsenkaiho, he told the dwarf executioner about his plans to skin the plus-sized lord after getting the pardon. But Fuchai was tired of hearing him yap and told him to shut his broke ass up. Tamiya then tried to make fun of Fuchai's line of work, but he explained the years he spent mastering the art of chopping bodies and threatened to cut him down for disrespecting executioners. After freeing himself with Fuchai's sword, Tamiya led the way into the island and came up with an idea to take everyone else out so they could take their time in finding the elixir. But things took a turn for the worst when they found the flower garden and got surrounded. Gabimaru and Sajiri also end up in the same situation with a mutated fish god. So the midget ninja starts thinking of a way out, but the god attacks, so he counters with a strike that almost blows out its waterlogged brain. After Gabimaru gets knocked down, Sajiri tries to help, but he tells her to stay away so her secure level skills won't slow him down. As he recalls a rule Osa gave him about unknown opponents, his brainstorming takes a bit too long, and Sajiri's struggle with the ugly butterflies distracts him. So the fish god decides to punish his lack of focus by rearranging his guts with a brutal slam. Sajiri gets surprised seeing him bleed, and he decides to make a run for it. But a bunch of ugly, botched giants surround them, causing Sajiri to gradually lose her shit. Meanwhile, Gabimaru finally locks in and pounces on the first giant with his special ninjutsu that turns its head into Thanksgiving dinner. While he keeps obliterating them faster than Levy from Attack on Titan, Sajiri keeps dancing with the butterflies like a truly worthless substitute until one of the giants decides to focus on her. Gabimaru notices and tries to block the concern for her by switching to his dark side. But he still ends up saving her and wonders why his dark side seems to like keeping her safe. The fish god tries to attack again, but it gets cut down by an alpha executioner named Genji, who shows up with Yusuriha and a plus-sized midget named Senta, who also became an executioner despite obviously lacking control over his belly. Yusuriha reintroduces herself to Gabimaru, and he tries to ask why she is clearly spreading out her mini-milkers, but he remembers Yui's lectures on being polite and thanks her for the save before asking for her true intentions. She then tells him to stop being so uptight and walks over to act like she needs his help, while pressing her mini-melons into his chest to turn off his ability to think straight. Unfortunately, he barely has any emotions left and pins her to the ground as punishment, so she apologizes and asks if they can at least work together. Sajiri then asks why she has 2 executioners, but she reveals that Genji was actually assigned to another useless criminal named Makiya, who fell for Yusuriha's beauty and got sent to the afterlife. Genji goes on to explain how his decision to keep following her is purely for the mission. But they can all clearly see how badly he wants to smash her ninja cakes. Senta tries to introduce himself as well, but she stops him from boring everyone with his negative aura personality and explains that working together might be their best bet at making it past all the crazy stuff on the island. After discussing it with Sajiri, Gabimaru accepts her proposal, and she tries to riz him again. But he pins her down with one last warning to stop trying to gain his trust. She then locks him in with her legs and says she never planned on gaining his trust, because only one of them can get the pardon by finding the elixir first. To get started, she explains that the little ugly butterflies are actually the most dangerous things she had seen so far, but he asks how she already knows so much about them. Turns out Makiya served as her lab rat and ended up taking enough venom to exterminate a small village because he was too stupid to see past Yuzuria's temptations. After her story, Senta pulls out his religious scrolls to explain the weird similarity between the giants they defeated and the current beliefs of several cultures. Yuzuria's promise to tell them all she has learned so far still sounds suspicious to Gabimaru, so he asks why she is so enthusiastic about the partnership, and she tells him a story about her poor little sister. Somewhere along the line of explaining her origin story, the lies start to get mixed up, so he tells her to stop pretending already, and she admits to not actually having some overly dramatic backstory fueling her delusions. Gabimaru eventually accepts her meaningless decision to go on a futile mission, but he can tell that something is still off and asks what she really did to Makiya. She then recalls sending him to the other side after the flowers took over, but keeps the details to herself and tries to hug him instead, which then leads to another pin down, while Sajiri's underdeveloped brain gets overwhelmed by everything and hits the snooze button. A little while back, a young warrior named Toma joined Sajiri's clan and quickly rose through the ranks to become an executioner under Izen's watch. He did all that just to rescue his brother, Chobai, and suggested the elixir quest in Shinsenkaiyo as a way to get his freedom back. At the time, the two brothers have just come face to face with a bunch of giants in a different part of the island, and while Chobai immediately starts attacking them, Toma watches and reminisces on the past. They both had a depressing childhood that led from their lives as the sons of a respected samurai to being worthless orphans abandoned by the roadside. Even then, they would get attacked by bandits, but Chobai was good at adapting and used that ability to quickly get settled into any situation to keep them both safe. He eventually became a scar-faced Cyclops wanted for crimes against all of humanity and told Toma to figure out a plan to rescue him. When he completes his trip down memory lane, Chobai suggests escaping to find better weapons, so they start running. But Toma's dollar store Rapunzel hair gets snatched up by one of the giants. Chobai takes one look at his pathetic state and keeps pushing forward. So Toma decides to rely on himself and slices off the monster's fingers before Chobai finishes it off with a new weapon he got from one of the defeated giants. Just then, he gets knocked down by a barnacle-stuffed giant, and they both get surrounded by its friends, who can all speak and keep yapping about justice until Chobai gets pissed. After destroying them all in an instant, he tells Toma that they have to keep catching bodies to get to the elixir first so they can both drink it and become immortal. Moments later, Sajiri has a dream where her father struggled to hide his disappointment in her life choices, before waking up and seeing Genji carefully watching over her. He then explains that they brought her to the cave after she passed out and suggests getting a little more rest. But the foolish overachiever gets up to find Gabimaru, who is chilling outside with Senta. She gets confused, so Gabimaru reveals his dinner plans while Senta works on their torn clothes, and Yusuriha takes a nap to regain the strength she uses to effortlessly lie worse than Pinocchio. Senta suggests going over what they have learned about the island while eating Gabimaru's snacks, and Yuzuriha gets hyped to finally have some food until she sees the culinary abomination the midget ninja cooked up. Gabimaru ignores her blatant disrespect for his Michelin star recipe and proceeds to get their brainstorming session started by explaining the little scouting mission he went on with Genji while gathering items for his death cookies. He and Genji noticed that a lot of the flowers were actually regular plant species, except for the fact that they were mostly what was left of the samurais sent for the first few expeditions. He goes on to say that nothing they found looks even similar to the elixir sketch they got from the shogun. And Senta takes over to talk about the religious statues that mostly appeared to be engaging in unholy acts. He gets curious to know how such intricate designs were created on what should be an ancient island, and that reminds Sajiri of the fact that the giants from earlier didn't have any organs. Senta then looks through his religious scrolls and comes up with a theory suggesting that the giants might actually be low-level deities created when God was feeling sloppy. After Gabimaru suddenly gets weirdly excited to keep looking for the elixir, Yuzuriha tells them to consider the possibility that they could actually be in hell. But Senta's lack of balls causes him to immediately change the topic, and they all agree to keep trying to figure out where the giants come from. Minutes pass, and Sajiri tries to get some air, but Genji interrupts with a proposal to take her place so she can return to their clan and live out her days as a baby-making machine. She tries to refuse, so he asks if she can actually defeat Gabimaru if a bunch of ugly mutant butterflies were enough to cut off her lights. He goes to destroy every ounce of self-confidence she has by describing her pathetic weakness in detail before telling her to take a boat and leave. Just then, Senta joins them and says getting off the island might actually be more difficult than trying to deal with half-baked demigods. While Senta goes into more detail on his theories, an ugly femboy executioner named Tenza struggles to fight against the ocean's current, while Nurgai explains that such a feat is impossible, especially for someone with twig-sized arms. He also reminds Tenza that returning without the elixir will only get him back on death row. But Tenza promises to speak to the shogun on his behalf, and finds hope when he sees a huge ship that belongs to the shogunate. A closer look erases his optimism as they realize that it is really the first of many ships that got wrecked from the escape attempts of every expedition sent to the island before them. The next moment, they start to see shadows, and Tenza pulls out his sword despite Nurgai's warnings, causing them to get attacked by the tentacles of a kraken. With their boat destroyed, Tenza suggests finding one to get back to the island and tears through the tentacle, while Nurgai follows behind him and starts to think the entire thing is a punishment for what happened to his grandfather. A little while back, he found a group of samurais posing as lost travelers and decided to take them back to his mountain tribe for shelter. Unfortunately, they turned out to be assassins sent to destroy such tribes because of their decision to live away from the shogunate, and captured him to get the location of other mountain tribes. After his arrest, Tenza found him and offered to help him get free through the quest to Shinsenkaiho. Minutes pass, and their search for a new boat ends up leading Tenza to Kishu, who has joined the Circle of Life as a new flower species. A tentacle then cuts him in half and gives Nurgai a brutal case of deja vu that leaves him unable to move a muscle. Tenza tells him to get back up, but he refuses and decides to accept his fate for causing the extinction of his people. Tenza then asks if that is what he really wants while fighting back the tentacles, and Nurgai gets frustrated because the fur-brained samurai apparently has trouble understanding English. Tenza refuses to abandon him and continues fighting until Nurgai remembers life with his grandfather and says he just wants to go back to life in the mountains. Thankfully, Tenza manages to find a boat just in time, so they put up one last fight and manage to get back to Shinsenkaiho in one piece. After they both catch their breath, Tenza suggests washing off the kraken blood so they don't get infected, but he gets the shock of his life when he starts cleaning up and realizes that Nurgai is actually a girl. His response causes her to tease him with her undeveloped plot cannons until the image burns into his mind. Once dressed, they decide to find an escape route before heading back into the island, where Genji has just finished calling Sajiri a weakling who should be at home making dinner, and walks off. Senta then tells her not to take his words to heart, claiming he actually wants her to stay because he has noticed a lot of changes in Gabimaru. and thinks she would be the best person to deal with whatever is going on in the midget ninja's head. Afterwards, the rest of the gang falls asleep, but Sajiri persists on being Gabimaru's baby sister despite his pleas to be left alone. She gets seated to continue her obsessive monitoring, and he uses the opportunity to ask if she is feeling better since it was the fight from earlier that likely made her vulnerable to the bugs. He also thanks her for helping him think clearly and explains his new plan to focus on finding the elixir before the shogun can send ninjas from his village. She then commends him on being strong enough to own up to his mistakes, but he claims she is actually stronger, which shocks her because her Sekiro-level skills have been very obvious from the start. He notices her shocked expression and tells her to start believing in herself a little more. So she holds on to his words of encouragement until the next morning when Genji asks if she is ready to head back. She decides to stay on the mission instead, so he tells her that battling half-baked gods on a forsaken island is not something a glorified dishwasher should be interested in. She persists on her decision and kneels to plead that he starts treating her as a fellow samurai instead of a delusional girl with daddy issues. To make his point clear, he tests her with a surprise attack, but she manages to steal the sword away, causing him to get ticked off. Just as he takes the sword back, an ugly one-eyed behemoth named Rokiroda shows up and slaps away half of his digestive system. Years ago, Rokiroda was an innocent but extremely obese baby that loved to stuff his face while playing around with rocks. But somewhere along the line, his monster appetite grew and led him down a bloody path that ended his parents and then the entire village. With the same deadly palm strike, he slams Genji into a tree with half of his insides missing, and Sajiri runs over to help despite Genji's commands to run away, just as Rokiroda gets close to give her the same treatment. The midget death machine kicks him into a bunch of trees and asks Sajiri for any information that can help subdue the rampaging Cyclops. All Sajiri can think of is the fact that Izan probably also got his insides ripped out, so Gabimaru decides to send Rokiroda on a one-way trip to the afterlife. He first recalls Osa's instructions to always assess his opponent's strength, but before he can figure out a strategy, Rokiroda rips out an entire tree and hurls it towards them. They survive, but Gabimaru realizes that being so short puts him at an obvious disadvantage and asks Yuzuriha for the help she promised to give him. She then reminds him that she is only the brains of their little country club and cheers him on instead. So he decides to fight solo and starts by dodging all of Rokiroda's unaliving attempts like his life depends on it. After trying out some of his deadliest attacks that would obliterate any regular man, he gets stuck trying to find an attack that would work. Meanwhile, Sajiri struggles to stop Genji from losing what's left of his organs, and he tries to tease her for losing all the bravado she was flaunting earlier on. But she gets emotional and says she doesn't care as long as she can help him survive. Hearing that causes him to change the way he sees her. So he apologizes for trying to shit on her goals and hands over his sword with one last command to take Rokiroda down with her top-level executioner skills. By then, Gabimaru has just come up with an insanely dangerous idea. But Rokiroda swings again and ends up losing a finger to Sajiri's blade. As they both decide to merge their skills, Tenza asks Yuzuriha for permission to help Genji, but she tells him to shut his fat-filled face up so she can learn something new from the fight. With Rokiroda's finger cut looking less gnarly, Gabimaru instinctively decides to go for his head and tells Sajiri to attack his legs to force him into a kneeling position. Once Rokiroda attacks again, Gabimaru redirects his punch, giving Sajiri an opening to chop off his leg. But the trauma starts to kick in and causes her to miss the target. She then takes a step back to get her daddy issues under control before taking off for another attempt and still being completely useless. Instead of admitting to being a wimp who is clearly in over her head, she tells Gabimaru that the only way out is to attack Rokiroda's neck. But the ugly giant suddenly starts crying in sonic waves that shatter their ears. In an instant, Gabimaru gets his little brain smashed into the earth, and Sajiri fears that his upper half has just become plant fertilizer. Luckily, he gets back on his feet, but his brain cells implode and send him crashing down. So Sajiri rushes over to help him right as Rokiroda leans in for the final blow. With death inching closer by the millisecond, Sajiri recalls Genji's words and gets the troubled emotional waves on her mind to even out. With her mental strength restored, she redirects Rokiroda's punch with a swing of her blade and pins him down with a second strike that shocks Yuzuriha, while she keeps going blow for blow with the emotional Cyclops. Genji yaps to himself as the blood loss starts affecting his brain cells. When Sajiri finally manages to bring him down, she immediately reaches behind him for the slice of death. but he jumps away at the last moment. Gabimaru then comes up with an idea to bring him down again with his special ninjutsu, and Yusuriha immediately makes a run for it with Tenza before he starts burning down the surrounding plant life until his wounds reopen. While Yusuriha proceeds to verbally assault him for being a fat pig who can't even see straight, Gabimaru's plan to cloud the airspace with smoke starts taking its effect on Rokuroda, so they watch from the safety of their missing height genes until he drops to get some air. Sajiri immediately gets into position to put him out of his misery, but he sees her at the last moment and tries to attack. After pinning his arm down with every fiber of muscle he has, Gabimaru tells her to stop using every situation as a chance to be dramatic. She ignores him and starts another meditation exercise to calm her troubled mind before taking the last swing to end the rampaging Cyclops. In that moment, Rokuroda takes one last trip down memory lane, and Sajiri notices, so she takes his head to give him a good farewell before sending him off to the other side. Gabimaru then reminds her of the still raging flames, so she takes one last glance at Genji and takes off running while thinking about her lost seniors. In a matter of seconds, all the half-baked gods in the area begin flocking towards the flames, which makes no sense to Gabimaru, but he suggests following the path they came from to hopefully find a new lead. After taking a moment to talk about their goals and how the recent setbacks should only serve as motivation, they both keep running until they meet Yuzuriha and Tenza on an edge looking over at what appears to be an abandoned village. Elsewhere, Toma and Chobai finish with a new batch of false gods, so Chobai decides to give his organs a taste of hell by feasting on one of the bodies and starts brainstorming ideas until he hears something just past the bushes. They slowly advance to avoid a sneak attack from another monster, but receive the shock of their lives when they find two divine humanoid creatures, Ju and Tao, performing a very unholy exercise on each other. After spotting them, Ju asks how they made it so far despite being worthless, ugly humans, and Chobai tries to act tough by asking if they are related to the monsters he just ate. Tao finds his delusional confidence amusing and suggests letting him join the unholy game, but that ends up pissing Ju off, so she switches forms just in case the boys believe in equality. Meanwhile, Gabimaru and the rest of the gang keep coming up with theories to explain the abandoned village until he senses someone watching and chases after them. He gets close and pulls the hood to see a cute little girl, Mei, but one of Groot's uncles, named Hauko, suddenly attacks to defend her. Gabimaru decides to keep chasing after Mei, so he dodges another attack from Hauko and kicks him into Senta before taking off with Sajiri following close behind to keep an eye on him. Tenza then tries to handle business, but Yuzuriha tosses his second pair of eyes to stop him from seeing her slippery ninjutsu. By then, Mei has gotten deeper into the woods, but Gabimaru easily catches up to her and tries to talk. The conversation ends when she flips him faster than a pancake and leaves him briefly paralyzed with shock until Sajiri catches up. She keeps chasing after Mei until she stops and tries to pop her insides out with a glowing punch, but Gabimaru blocks it and nearly gets his back blown out. The constant beatings he has endured while trying to get answers starts to piss the midget ninja off, so he grabs a bunch of vines and ties Mei up until she starts bawling her eyes out. He then lets her down, and Sajiri takes a couple of minutes to make her feel better before Yusuriha and Senta catch up. They all gather around to discuss friendly torture methods for Mei. But Hauko regains consciousness and begs for Mei to be handed back to him in exchange for all the information they want on the village and elixir. Yusuriha rejects his offer because interrogating Mei would be a lot less stressful, but Hauko promises to fix her a bath as well, and that changes all their minds. On the way there, Sajiri asks if it is wise to trust a talking tree, but Gabimaru decides that it's better than chasing after the half-baked gods for answers. Once inside Hauko's place, Gabimaru starts demanding answers, but Yusuriha tells him to put the investigation on hold so she can finally wash off the fishy odor she has been carrying around for days. She tells Sajiri to consider taking a break, but Little Miss Daddy Issues continues yapping about the importance of her job until the water turns off. Several minutes pass, so Mei gets them a pair of washcloths to help with the bath. Meanwhile, Gabimaru keeps talking Tenza out of stuffing his face with the food Hauko serves them. When the four-eyed hippo starts tweaking, Gabimaru gives up on him and asks Hauko about his relationship with Mei. He refuses to speak on the topic, so Gabimaru switches to their original quest to find the elixir, and the girls get back just in time to hear about it. While they eat, Hauko explains that the elixir is actually a substance called tan that is stored in an urn and rumored to give eternal life to whoever consumes it. while Yusuriha and the others argue about the strong difference from the description they got before the mission. Gabimaru's hopes of reuniting with Yui increase. He then asks for some kind of proof, so Hauko tells them about the supernatural beings called Tensen. At the time, Chobai has just chopped off half of Ju's upper body, but it all grows back like a regenerative plant on steroids. Ju then shatters the scarred psycho's axe and beats them both to a pulp before dumping their bodies into a pit filled with other unlucky warriors that all thought they were hot stuff. Back at the village, Gabimaru and Yusuriha threaten to turn Hauko into pieces of firewood if he keeps capping. But he assures them of his honesty and casually pulls off his arm to demonstrate a mere portion of the elixir's power. Afterwards, Gabimaru heads to the bath to clean off his wounds and discusses Hauko's claims of having lived for over a millennia with Sajiri. They both struggle to believe everything the possessed tree said, but decide to use it as a guide in finding the elixir, as it is the only lead they have. Once in the bath, they meet Mei, who immediately starts crying, and Gabimaru completely ignores her to get his wounds cleaned up. So Sajiri protects her eyes from his baby carrot and sees a huge scar across her back, after also realizing that she has never had a proper bath. She gives Gabimaru a barrel and tells him to use the bath as an opportunity to ease up before getting back to Mei and treating her with a spa-level cleaning. While getting himself cleaned up, Gabimaru recalls a similar night where Yui washed his back and gave him life advice to help him ease up. She let her hair down after getting him cleaned, and he finally figured out why. So he told her not to worry about hiding her face scar around him because he actually found it attractive. Remembering the smile it brought to her face causes him to say the exact same thing to Mei. And that leaves Sajiri in utter confusion because she never thought the midget death machine could be emotionally mature. On the way back to Hauko's place, she rethinks her stance on his lack of a soul, while he gets a clear vision of his goal and decides to stop at nothing to achieve it. Years ago, Tenza was nothing more than a street rat who robbed anyone he felt like just to get a day's meal and spent his nights sleeping with the bugs. That all ended on the day he bumped into a group of swordsmen that wasted no time in calling him the worthless piece of trash he was. As payback, he bashed their heads in an alleyway and was about to finish off the last one when he got stopped by the sword of an ugly, blind executioner named Shin. Back in Shinsenkaio, he keeps searching for an escape route to leave the island. But Nuragai decides to continue running her mouth until he loses his shit. After a lot of yelling, she only finds him a lot more attractive, so he decides to ignore her lack of self-respect to continue the search. Just then, another smoke show Tensen, Jin, shows up to ask if they had anything to do with the butchered false gods. The fact that she casually switched to a male body gives Tenza all the information he needs, so he takes off running with Nuragai. But Jin catches up in an instant and blows him away with the same mysterious power Mei used on Gabimaru. After Nuragai flips to safety, Tenza cuts out Jin's eyes to get the upper hand, but they grow back in seconds, which then leaves him no choice but to fight. With a single breath to calm his nerves, he charges in and instantly lands multiple slices to take off the low-budget Deadpool's limbs. He then takes off running with Nuragai to get some distance, but Jin still catches up with his head slowly reattaching. The next moment, a sword takes it off again, and Tenza gets excited to see Shin, who doesn't need his eyes to know that they all need to continue running before the unkillable hottie can reattach himself. Several minutes later, they get far enough to catch their breaths at a safe distance, and Shin uses the opportunity to smack Tenza's empty skull for using sloppy techniques. He goes on to explain that he had actually found a current leading out of the island, but his lack of eyeballs made a solo escape impossible, so he went back to find others. Tenza gets excited and suggests heading there immediately, but Shin suddenly pulls out his sword to ask why he is helping Nuragai instead of sending her up to the Lord. He then explains how he first enjoyed every minute of Akajinu's cowgirl skills before permanently putting her to sleep, and asks for an explanation because aiding criminals could be seen as an act of treason. In order to make Shin understand his actions, Tenza reminds him that he also took a chance on the day he decided to take in a worthless street thief. Remembering that, Shin promises to give it some thought and decides to spare Nuragai until they escape the island. With Jin being the most dangerous enemy they have ever encountered, Shin suggests taking a moment to sharpen their skills in case they run into him again. Right as Tenza suggests staying on the run to avoid him, Jin shows up again, and Shin immediately pulls them both away. Unfortunately, he loses a part of his throat in the process, and Tenza charges in to get an equal pound of flesh. But Jin easily dodges all his attacks and blasts a few holes through the stupid ex-convict's body. The injuries send him back in time to when Shin started training him in the dojo and gave him a bunch of speeches in hopes that his negative IQ brain would finally see the light. After getting smacked around for days, Tenza gave up and told Shin to shove the training up his disabled cheeks. But Tenza easily agreed to let him go on the condition that he had to land a single hit first. The next morning, Tenza snuck out to return to his life as a smelly thief, but Izan found him and made him tag along for a walk. They ended in a cemetery where Izan showed him the tombstone of Shin's former student, Teshin, who was a lot like Tenza and left the dojo because Shin didn't really give two shits about his students back then. A little while later, Shin went to perform his executioner duties and froze in place when he realized that the criminal was Teshin, who went back to a life of petty crimes after the dojo. Izan then asked Tenza if he was also ready to end up at the wrong end of his master's blade. But the usually stupid brat was smart enough to choose life and went back to continue his training with Shin. With the flashes of his life complete, Tenza takes a look at Nurugai and decides to protect her with the strength left in his puny muscles. In an instant, he lands a jaw-breaking cross that shatters Jin's face and continues pounding until Jin adds an even larger hole that empties his organs. Nurugai tries to help, but Shin holds her back and runs in to save his student. With the last ounce of strength he has, Tenza tells them both to escape, so Shin respects his wishes by grabbing Nurugai and bolting as fast as his legs can manage. Moments later, they get away safely, and Nurugai attacks Shin while asking why he abandoned Tenza, so he tells her what Tenza's last wishes were and makes her understand that they are both too weak and pathetic to fight Jin. Meanwhile, she has just finished with Tenza and leaves him in a pool of his remains as he spends his final moments reminiscing on his training with Shin. Back at Haoko's place that night, Senta tries to explain all the mysteries he uncovered during the day, but the crazy stories eventually cause his fat stuffed brain to short-circuit. Afterwards, they all fall asleep, but Gabimaru stays up recalling the warning Senta gave against trying to find the elixir without having much knowledge of the island. Unable to exercise patience, the midget ninja takes off running to find the island's center, where Haoko claimed the elixir should be, but he ends up running into what looks like a cemetery for Haoko's relatives. Their unnatural chanting while being frozen in place reminds him of Senta's warnings, but he follows his decision to keep moving until he finds an enormous gate. Just as he reaches for the handle, Jin shows up, and Gabimaru immediately senses the dark energy flowing inside her body. Unlike the shocked look on his face, Jin feels nothing but frustration over having to deal with another dumpster-brained nutcase and tells him to leave so she can have a moment of rest. The living gnome starts asking for the elixir instead of running for dear life, so Jin lunges in, but Gabimaru does the same and leaves her with a broken arm before twisting her head. As she attacks with a barrage of punches, he watches closely while dodging to understand her powers and twists her head again before unleashing his ninjutsu to create Tensen beef jerky. The midget feels confident in his takedown and turns to continue his search, but she returns with a brutal uppercut that smashes him into the wall. She then switches form again and feels bad for terminating him, but he manages to survive being crushed by a boulder, so they continue the fight. He goes back to analyzing her every move and keeps countering with special combinations until a kick to the gut causes Jin to cough up her blood. Gabimaru tries to figure out why that attack had such a drastic effect, and Jin mentions something about him having some kind of special ability. She then activates her telekinetic skills and opens him up like a can of tuna before unleashing a barrage of punches that slowly shatter every bone in his body. When Gabimaru gets close to breaking point, Yui's face summons his dark side, causing him to get closer for an all-or-nothing brawl with Jin that somehow leads to the immortal hottie looking worse than roadkill. While he watches, she activates another transformation, but this time, she becomes a two-faced monstrosity straight out of Monster Inc. After getting zapped, Gabimaru tries to fight back and gets hit with enough electricity to power a small country. Jin then proceeds to rearrange his entire body with incredibly powerful punches until he takes a trip to La La Land. Over there, he enjoys one last day with Yui and thanks her for always loving him before the blood loss brings him back to reality. Just as Jin gets her tentacles around his neck, he delivers a deadly blow and remembers the special technique Osa taught him to take down his opponent in a life or death situation. He instinctively unleashes a powerful fireball, but that only gets him free of her tentacles, so she powers up to finish him off. At that moment, Mei shows up and activates a barrier before her blast sends them tumbling down the cliffside. Hours later, Senta gets back to Haoko's place and confesses to being a scared little bitch. so Sajiri decides they will go find Gabimaru as a team. Suspecting that Mei probably left to find him, Hauko decides to tag along. So they all head out and start asking questions about the Tensen to prepare themselves for a surprise attack. Somewhere in Horai at the time, the Tensen all gather to catch up on life as immortal hotties. But the top-ranked Tensen Rain crashes the chit-chat to demand a report on the safety of the elixir. Ju immediately calls out Jin for being a pathetic weakling and blasts her head off to show the others how much tan she wasted on Gabimaru and Tenza. Rain then reminds him of the rules governing their relationship and threatens to make him a lot uglier than Ju if he ever attacks one of them again. He goes on to warn them against underestimating the humans because of what happened to the false gods and pours out cups of the elixir to replenish their immortality. At the time, Hauko has just finished the crash course on Rain's immortal family and decides to tell them a bit about himself as they get to the cemetery of tree people. Turns out, they were all once humans who lived a very long life in the village. But unlike regular humans, they would become trees instead of dying and pray to the Tensen for their souls to enter Horai. As they get closer, Sajiri's concern for Gabimaru increases. Meanwhile, he finally wakes up by a river and takes a moment to remember what happened. Just as he gets back on his feet to resume the mission, Tamiya shows up and offers him a painless end. While the handicapped criminal rambles on about his goals, Gabimaru starts a mental battle to compare their strengths. But Tamiya realizes what the bleeding midget is up to and joins the mind duel until Fuchai calls for a timeout. The human smurf suggests having a civilized discussion to share what they all know about the island, and Gabimaru accepts that violence might not be the answer for once, so he gets seated to humbly ask for their assistance. Tamiya responds with an attempt to slice open the midget ninja's head, but Gabimaru remains absolutely still to show that there are no diabolical plans behind his surrender. Seeing this causes Tamiya to feel disappointed, but he ultimately agrees to hold off on the violence. So Fuchai starts asking about Gabimaru's experience, and he proceeds to give them all the details of what has gone down so far. They both struggle to believe everything he said about the Tensen, but it only increases their curiosity. So Tamiya agrees to help out and reveals his true goal of becoming a living legend, while the human smurf gets excited to dissect the immortals. Just then, Mei finally wakes up with a growth spurt, and Gabimaru's concussed brain tries to understand how, but she calls his name, and he immediately rushes over to ask for everything she knows about the elixir. After realizing that his intensity might give her PTSD, he dials it back and thanks her for the save before asking if she is also one of the Tensen. At that moment, Senta has just stopped the group to explain a new theory about Shinsenkyo that he realized after comparing all the inconsistent similarities to actual religions. Yuzuriha realizes that the plus-sized nerd has just entered the zone and listens, as he explains that the useless criminal Makia was arrested for starting up an abnormal religion, mainly filled with botched versions of other cultures in a bid to overthrow the shogunate. Senta goes on to say that Makiya's psycho-religion appears a lot similar to what they have seen in Shinsenkyo, which would mean that the island has an equally psychotic creator that apparently has an unhealthy obsession with flowers. When his nerd mode gets deactivated, Yuzuriha explains that the insanity going on with the island has been a thing for over a millennia, which means that even Gabimaru's short-fused madness won't be enough to stop it. But Sajiri claims the midget ninja might actually have what it takes to pull off a miracle. Back at the riverbed, Mei tells Gabimaru about Tao, an energy wave flowing through every being that gives the Tensen their supernatural abilities as they have mastered its use. Gabimaru asks for the steps to master Tao as well, but Mei's freshly developed mind can only break it down into a bunch of words that they all have a hard time understanding. On the other hand, Hauko breaks it down in detail to the rest of the gang as they get closer to Horai, but Senta's big back starts to slow them down, and Yuzuriha asks how he even became an executioner despite being too weak and sloppy to carry his own weight. Elsewhere on the island, Nuragai tries to pull off a sneak attack on Shin, but he blocks it without breaking a sweat and protects her from the sword before refusing to teach her anything about the ways of a swordsman. She then reminds him of the promise he made to avenge Tenza, but he still turns her down to avoid losing another student. So she grabs his cloak and begs with tears running down her face because she is also tired of being a worthless low-level fighter. The fact that they both feel like pathetic weaklings gives him a change of heart. So he starts by explaining that his skill comes from an ability to see Tao, the same energy force the Tensen use as a power source. Unlike them, he can only figure out his opponent's strengths by closely monitoring the flow of their energy. and right at that moment, a bunch of false gods appear, so he decides to give Nurugai a full demonstration of his abilities. While she follows his lead to cut down the brain-dead giants, another group also pays Gabimaru a visit, so Tamiya places Mei on his shoulder before they all start slashing. Elsewhere in Horai, a Sigma Tensei mutant gives Tao a taste of his glizzy while talking about how effective the pit of human flowers is. They both underestimate the one-eyed psychopath, Chobai, who climbs all the way out with Toma and immediately starts looking for the smoke. Toma suggests coming up with a plan first, so they don't end up like the human vases in the pit. But Chobai already claims to have figured out the Tensei's weakness. Before making any moves, he grabs a random arm to fill his belly. But an ugly, rag-faced freak suddenly shows and forces them into defensive positions. He introduces himself as a Dachai created to serve the Tensei, and kindly asks them to become flowers by returning to the pit. But Chobai charges in to smash his incredibly ugly face. After losing an arm, Master Mopface regenerates and summons a group of false gods to assist him. So Chobai puts Toma in charge of taking out the overgrown lab experiments while he takes on the Dachai. The lack of control over his emotions makes it easy for the Dachai to read his Tao until he finds an opening and pops a hole through Chobai's head that knocks him out. Toma tries to help, but the false gods block his path, and the Dachai decides to drop Chobai back in the pit to drain out the rest of his life force. Just then, Chobai rips out a chunk of his slimy face and tells Toma to stop crying like a worthless beta. Seeing the vines on his neck, the Dachai realizes that he must have drawn out power from the pit and immediately tries to take him down. But Chobai easily pops his joints back in place and figures out the trick to seeing Tao. The Dachai gets surprised by his ability to easily accept the changes to his body. But becoming a low-budget Wolverine happens to be a walk in the park for the one-eyed psycho, who actually cut out his own eye, just to show that he was messed up from birth. The Dachai's attempts to stop him all end in pathetic failure, so he calls more false gods, but Toma had already sent them all to the afterlife. Seconds later, Chobai figures out the trick to using telekinesis and tests it out by ripping a hole through the mop-faced dummy's insides. While he goes on to interrogate him about the Tensei hideout, Toma tries to understand the vines on his neck until he takes a closer look and realizes that his brother might be slowly turning into an immortal fertilizer. Back at the river, Tamiya slices through waves of false gods and asks Mei for more information on the Tao technique, but she keeps telling him that it has nothing to do with his strength. While also taking down the false gods, Gabimaru focuses more on the mysterious power Mei used to save him and eventually scares her with his creepy staring. Tamiya then scolds him for being so terrifyingly ugly and continues the fight until a bug-faced Dachai spots Mei and distracts him with an attack before grabbing her. After setting her down, he explains his excitement to finally see her again because she apparently got kicked to the curb by Rain centuries ago. After telling Gabimaru and Tamiya to stop involving themselves in matters beyond the range of their slow brains, he continues pleading with Mei, but Gabimaru shields her from the sight of his puke-inducing face. Tired of watching the midget ninja and his pathetic play at being Sigma, the bug-faced Dachai calls out his even uglier partner, and they both summon the bugs of the island, who all happen to be their disgusting little children. Tamiya immediately blows them away and warns Gabimaru of the dangers of close contact by showing what used to be his hand. Just as they both get ready for an onslaught, Bugface uses the telekinetic attack to throw them off and launches a flurry of attacks that redirects their punches to each other. The Dachai still struggles to understand why they bother trying to help Mei, so Gabimaru explains his intention to pay her back for saving him and asks why they even need her in the first place. Realizing that the midget ninja also clearly lacks common sense, they stop the fighting to teach them about Tao and the steps taken to master its use. Of all techniques used in learning to control Tao, the art of clapping cheeks happens to be the most effective, which is why the Tensei casually spend days swapping forms to visit Pound Town. The crash course makes Gabimaru realize that the flow of Tao is how they can swap bodies, but Mei's role still remains unclear, so Bugface explains that she is a lower version of the Tensei without the ability to swap bodies. Although Rain gave her the scar and sent her packing because of that, it meant that she could help the Dachai reach their true potential by clapping cheeks. Tamiya finally realizes why they are so eager to take her back and asks for Gabimaru's help destroying them. But the midget ninja has already gone off the rails and fires up his ninjutsu to stop them. The Dachais both activate their bug powers to the max and defend against their attack, So Gabimaru creates a wall of fire to keep them busy, while Fuchai and Mei try to show them how to use Tao. The dwarf scientist's theory of weakening his mind confuses him, but Mei uses her powers to show him how alternating the state of his mind is key to mastering Tao. It all finally makes sense to the fun-sized death machine, so he runs straight through his own flames and uses his new ability to closely watch the flow of Tao being used by the Dachais. Right then, he predicts one last punch and shatters the Dachai's bug-packed fist before simultaneously dropping both of them and demanding a surrender. They both admit defeat and promise to tell them everything they know while secretly preparing another attack. But Tamiya sees through the facade and immediately rushes in to stop them. Right as Bugface summons a caterpillar tsunami, Gabimaru uses his ninjutsu to light up his partner, while Tamiya cuts the cultured PDF right down the middle. Meanwhile, Sajiri and the gang finally make it into Horai, but Haoko's head suddenly takes a walk as Muden welcomes them to the last trip of their pathetic lives. While Sajiri immediately switches to battle mode, Yuzuriha comes close to crapping her pants and makes a run for it, but Muden captures her in an instant and promises to make her final moments less painful than the others. Senta then rushes over to Haoko, who managed to survive, and asks Muden if his soul will be welcomed into Horai. In a cruel twist of fate, Muden reveals that the whole story of getting their souls accepted was a lie to keep Haoko's people and the other experimental creatures in line. He then summons a bunch of previously human dummies and explains the special changes he made to their bodies, and Senta uses the opportunity to ask if they also turn humans into the elixir of immortality. Hearing that causes Muden to crack up, so he tells them that there has never actually been an elixir of immortality, because Tan is merely what the Tensons use to replenish their life force. Before he can finish calling them a bunch of hopeless idiots, Yuzuriha escapes his toys and uses her ninja stars to take off his head. She then tells Sajiri to make a run for it, but the wannabe executioner remains frozen in shock, so Yuzuriha slaps her out of it so they can all make it out in one piece. Unfortunately, Muden regenerates faster than they expected and turns his human toys into sewage bombs, but Yuzuriha manages to escape and reveals her hidden ability to also see Tao. Seeing that impresses Muden, so he offers to train her, but Senta interrupts to challenge him in exchange for her freedom. After telling the dollar store Nikocado Avocado to shut his fat mouth, he gives Yuzuriha her first lesson by blasting Sajiri a couple hundred feet away. He then tries to explain the technique, but Senta makes him experience being disabled for the first time and gives Yuzuriha an opening to escape. The usually spineless ninja instead decides to test out her slime skill by wrapping him up in strands of her most potent venom, but even that is unable to stop Muden's regeneration, so Senta takes off his head to remind Yuzuriha of his initial plan to run away. To no one's surprise, Muden fully heals up in time to take them both on at once and they both lose to his insane stamina. Sajiri then rejoins the fight, but Muden analyzes her Tao and asks why she even bothered coming to the island with such a pathetic life force. After ignoring him, she charges in with an unpredictable attack that gets her sword lodged into his midsection, and Haoko expects his plan to cut out Muden's energy source to succeed. But he still regenerates and says such an attack is wasted on someone as useless as Sajiri. Just then, she uses a special breathing technique to amplify her tan and slices right through Muden's eye before he can escape. With her new energy level leaving the once untouchable Tenson with a cut he can't heal, Yuzuriha gets optimistic, and Senta also pulls up his big boy pants for a triple threat attack. Once Muden charges in for another attempt to end them all, they combine their kills to slowly take off parts of his body until he ends up worse than a hospital vegetable, with Sajiri's sword seconds from permanently turning his lights off. Like clockwork, he escapes again and switches forms in mid-air before preparing a wave of telekinetic blasts to pop open their heads. Sajiri starts to lose strength and hope, but Yuzuriha assures her of a good chance at victory and activates her slime jutsu to latch onto Muden's leg. She responds by focusing all her attacks on Yuzuriha, but she survives and counters by slamming Muden into one of the shrines, right before Senta stabs right through his chest to hold him in place. Sajiri then charges in for one final slice that pops the obnoxious immortal open like a birthday piñata before they leave him to bleed out on the floor. Sajiri initially refuses to believe that it was that easy to defeat a Tenson, but Senta convinces her, so they decide to take a break right next to the 1,000-year-old murder weapon like sensible adults. After noticing the weird way Senta watches Yuzuriha, Sajiri asks if he has feelings and catches him off guard. But he then proceeds to tell her about his childhood dream of becoming an artist. Like every guy born into a family of emotionless neck choppers, he eventually convinced himself that his dreams were not valid until he met Yusuriha and became intoxicated by her carefree attitude and lack of fear. Hearing that reminds Sajiri of Gabimaru, who is still by the river with the others and takes his time asking Mei about her powers. Watching him be so gentle causes Fuchai to realize that Sajiri's initial report of his straightforward brutality is wrong, and that makes him wonder if the midget death machine can actually achieve his goal. But he suddenly starts losing blood and passes out. Back in Horai, Yuzuriha sees that Muten has become a pile of flowers and almost gets speared by one of them. But Senta jumps in to take the hit and ends up in a dream state laced with coke as the poison turns him into a fat flower vase. Muten then switches to his two-faced demon form and tries to poison the girls, but his vines get shredded in an instant by Shin. After giving Nurgai instructions to help Senta, he makes them all leave before using the new techniques he had been working on to slice through Muten's attacks with ease. Once they get to a safe distance, Nurgai cuts out the flowers growing on Senta's face flabs, and Yusuriha takes over to help stop his bleeding. The sound of Shin getting his bones crushed puts them on high alert again, but Nurgai feels confident in her blind master's abilities. After making it through another series of attacks, Shin manages to kick the Godzilla-sized mutant a couple blocks away and takes a moment to get his breathing under control. But Muten gets back up and activates the flower poison he secretly injected into Shin's cuts. He immediately cuts them all out, adding a bunch of new wounds in the process that speeds up his blood loss. He gets himself hyped up for the second round, but Sajiri easily predicts that the delusional nutcase won't last another minute on his own and suggests teaming up to help him. Yuzuriha immediately rejects the idea and blames her spineless behavior on a lack of energy, so Nurgai tries to share some with a hug, but it has no effect. She then tries it with Sajiri, and it actually increases her Tau, so Nurgai explains how she once did it to her grandfather and also tested it out on Shin. With their energy levels increased, they both head back in to help the disabled swordmaster, who immediately warns of the flower poison and hears how Yusuriha used her slime to give them both a protective coat. Sajiri then comes up with a plan to draw most of Muten's firepower so Shin can cut down both of his energy sources with his amplified speed. Once Muten resumes his attacks, Nurgai shows off her insane agility, and Sajiri easily cuts through his poison vines, causing him to experience a moment of pride as a master. He then gets behind Muten and uses the strength he has left to cut off both his legs, causing his regeneration to slow down. As a last-ditch effort to stop them, Muten lights up everything in sight, but Shin charges through, with the pain of losing Tenza giving him all the motivation he needs. The anger causes his Tau to reach dangerously high levels, and Muten tries to push him away, but Sajiri stabs his arm into the ground to give Shin enough time for the finishing slice. Once he gets close enough, Shin focuses the rest of his Tau into the sword, but just as he gets ready to cut, he realizes that Muten's core is not in his midsection. With seconds to spare, he struggles to figure out where it is, but Senta shows up with Yuzuriha's help and tells him to strike the ovule. Shin immediately lands the cut and luckily gets it right, so Muten thanks him for putting an end to his 1,000-year-long boredom before returning to Mother Nature. The group then turns their attention to Senta, who looks worse than a Thanksgiving turkey about to get butchered. Sajiri frantically tries to come up with a solution to help him, but Yusuriha tells her to accept that he won't make it back and gets close to give him hope in his last moments. To make his transition to the other side peaceful, she places his head against her melons just in case he never got to feel one during the course of his life. After laying him to rest, Shin tries to create a plan that follows the course of his job as an executioner, but Sajiri tells him to forget about sides because they clearly need all the help they can get to even stand a chance of making it back in one piece. Later on, Gabimaru wakes up in a cave and immediately gets defensive, so Tamiya explains that they carried him there because he passed out by the river, but he still seems a bit lost. Moments later, Sajiri and the others find a temple covered in fog and make their way inside to get refreshed with the supplies they can find. Shin then uses the opportunity to discuss what they already know about Tau, and Yusuriha reminds them of Muten's claims about there being no elixir. Sajiri refuses to believe it because Gabimaru told her about his immortal village chief, but then Yusuriha tells her about a ritual used by ninja tribes to instill fear in new recruits by showing them some insanely magical feat at a young age. She also talks about how weird it is that a top-ranked ninja, who has barely served his purpose to the clan, already has a wife who also happens to be the chief's daughter. While Yusuriha dives deeper into the hypnotic techniques used by ninja villages to keep top-level death machines like Gabimaru in line, the midget ninja realizes that he has amnesia and plays it cool since he has no idea who the others are. Later that night, Shin finds Sajiri on the porch and tries to mess with her. But the recent trauma she has endured makes his dad jokes sound like ear poison, so he switches to a more serious conversation about Gabimaru. Sajiri expresses her concern for the fun-sized Grim Reaper and gets sad as she considers the fact that the one thing keeping him motivated might just be one huge lie created to control him. This brings us to the end of Gabimaru's quest for the Elixir of Immortality. Thanks for sticking around until the end, you absolute legend. Like, subscribe, and click on the screen to watch some of our other exciting videos. Until next time, stay awesome, stay Annie Geek.